Right, so when I was researching the Jack Ryan S&M, basically, so it's 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 seemingly like a normal hookup site. It's seemingly like that, okay? Most of them, especially those ones, because it focuses on law enforcement, okay? But that when I found the people that were developing it, okay, you know, tech nerds, mobies. So one of the things that they're doing nowadays, this happened with the Game of Thrones, where that one was more like fantasy nerdy that ended up being like slaves for pushing white supremacy drugs. It like eventually pushes the group into a contract on a dark web into selling white supremacy drugs. And so the crazy people that built Jack Ryan, they like hate cops. And so what currently I'm reviewing through it. So essentially, these people, they sit around and they're like, oh, we're gonna find some, they have like these vials that look like dildos, okay? So that's kind of how it kind of starts like that. But then in the end, they like, everybody kind of progressively blackmails in a typical dark web kind of way. And then when they hit the slave level, then everything switches. The same thing happened in Game of Thrones. Everything switches into just like a mercenary style contract. And so the dangers of the Jack Ryan one is that the people that developed it hate cops in all ways, and it focuses on law enforcement. It focuses on the women that would never want to be with any of those tech nerds and shit that developed it. It focuses on those type of people, snobby people and shit. And so, basically, there's potentials for people who are doing that for a dirty bomb, uh, some sort of church poison kind of contract. Uh, Potentially just like a regular kind of pizzeria bombing. There's potentials for like a presidential like targeting in it. And so these would be the kind of things that those are kind of like typical, those would be typical mercenary contracts. There's Ebola, so biological kind of stuff. And see, this is what happens, and that you know this is where these theme-based hookup sites are kind of falling into a very typical where people are normal, and a few years go by, and everybody turns like neurotic and high stressed and stern and constantly serious and shit. Yeah. And so the thing that I know about, hookup S&M is that whatever paranoia causes that like serious sternness type of stuff once they reach that certain level. Everybody, all the guys turn into like fucking assholes, borderline psycho-y assholes. That's the kind of shit that the stress and paranoia damn near changes people in most fucking ways. And that one of the things that I've been researching for the last 7 years. Some pretty serious stuff. Like I say, I get more of an upper level access when in the past, and then I'm able to do an audio listening in on some of those dark webs, and that people are making explanations of being involved with stuff, and then Mormon calls them crazy. And then that's what gives me more of a indicator to whatever they're saying probably being something that's truthful. See, whenever Mormon starts calling people crazy, those group of Mormons that do that, those people are fucking crazy. And whenever they start calling somebody crazy, that's where whatever they're saying is probably truthful. And so, one of the things about, because they do see, it changes every season. They like, the new season kind of, it's like a second phase. That it's like, people start doing the contract, and then it kind of goes back to normal, and then they pick up the contract again, and then whatever the beginning development stuff has a team that fine-tunes stuff, and then they work on it even further. And so that's kind of what it is with the seasons. And so this is where a lot of extensive, like, luring development went into this Jack Ryan, and that it targets the church people, these church QAnon types, I mean, all of those people. And then it eventually gets to where they work on filtering any information so that they can all work on it and stuff. See, here's what it is about these hookup sites. They run up huge, massive credit. Nobody pays any money into it. They utilize tons of stuff that literally actually costs money. And then it racks up, they bring in so many people, it racks up this huge bill. And then the contract pays it off. And then they all work on it. And so, that is like, that the way that those contracts operate in the United States, it works on this counter-opted tech psycho way where it hardens itself from exposure. It hardens itself from being shut down. It gets analyzed in the way that these child traffickers redevelop and rework stuff. If something fails, then they analyze it, and then they rework it with a more hardened more hardened rework and shit like that. And so this is like where these contracts end up pushing themselves to. It's like earlier today I had the explanation of why these people are still able to operate in this area doing that stuff. And so those type of people, those are like the people that like develop this type of stuff. And that they put the same type of like rework, counter op type of stuff into it. And it ends up being where everybody like works on it. And that it doesn't seem to have anybody like preventing its progressive development. So that's where the need to be like locating people who were doing that S&M. This is probably the worst one. I mean, it targets intelligence. It does. I mean, it it targets anyone and anywhere that would be interested or something in intelligence. It's like, if I wasn't such a blatant, unblackmailed man, then I would be targeted, but yeah, they don't ever want me. They don't ever want me to be in it. One of the things I'm able to do is I'm able to make people not want me being in that shit, okay? Because they know that I would just fucking dark off everything, and basically, well, these methods that they use to get people to go into that stuff are pretty effective, are pretty convincing, you know? It's like, it's like, I mean, I overheard some of their, see, I hear when they attempt to target me, I hear that stuff. Because they click on my profile and then they want to like target me, and then they have like a discussion, and then I hear it. Okay, yeah, basically, and so I don't know. Their thought was to get my ex-wife, who is like my Achilles heel for being her bitch. But that I would never get into a hookup site like that, and that is just, I just don't have any desire to do that. But the reality is that I know that the Jack Ryan one, the luring aspect was that, oh, law enforcement's in it, so nobody's gonna be psycho-y and shit. And so it has a lot of luring because everybody's been in these other ones a lot of the time. And that is what like pushes people into this one, is because they're in some other one and everybody's like a raging psychotic mopey. And then the Jack Ryan one gets marketed as like policed in ways. And so then that becomes an effective, because, but, you know, it targets the dark web speaker people, okay? It does. That, I mean, most of these, the Game of Thrones, Ready Player, Jack Ryan, let's see, there's other ones, the 50 Shades of Grey, I mean, that stuff, all that stuff, they're all tailored around the hearing aid stuff. Once people go into one, then they attempt to look for one that isn't like crazy and psychotic. And so that is why the Jack Ryan one is effective. Essentially, the people that created it would have been in other ones, and then the pretty chicks wouldn't have had sex with them. So they would have built this shit as a way of, because they're all psychotic tech nerds that build that shit. I mean, it just is. It's just the people that actually build it are fucking raging, psychotic, crazy people. And so this is where like, and that here's the reality. These people, they a lot of times they'll be the villain or something like that, and that eventually that turns into them being like the suicide bombers and shit. And so basically, if you're like a slutty bad person, then you're like a villain. And then if you're like a churchy nice guy or something, then you're Jack Ryan's or something. Yeah. And that is kind of what it is. But I mean, eventually it gets to where it becomes the only available paybacks end up being these like mercenary contracts, because the fucking tech nerds set it up that way so that they could sit there from their other dark web hacker shit laughing at them. I mean that's kind of what it is. That the people that made it, they did it to just laugh at all the law enforcement that they got shoved into terror-based contracts. So I mean, there's like, and you see that to be in other ones, to have people being crazy and tech psychos and the weird masky guys and shit. This is like where it's just it's naturally intuitive for most people to be moving to this Jack Ryan shit, just based on its allure of being a more lawful kind of world to be operating with those speakers in. And that is like where it ends up being the fucking worst one in the end. To be it. And so that's like where when I was saying the FBI was Jack Ryan super cucking, okay, those people, they kind of embraced, and they attempt to not do but that the things that they're doing are essentially just as psycho as the fucking other shit that everybody was in. And this is like, this is fast emerging, because the more this, see, it's like, you think about it like this, like right now you got Putin doing the Ukraine stuff, you got the COVID issue, that stuff's like taking up all the resources and time in our government in ways. And so now is a vulnerability that could potentially be getting exploited by terrorism based on so many different avenues in the world that are stretching thin the resources of intelligence or military. It's like a multifaceted, multi-pronged, like, when it was just like going after terrorism, that was where they had one purpose that they could wholeheartedly go into. Now we got Putin. Now Putin's using hackers like this, and this is, and so as more layers of stuff get thrusted on the federal government, it's like COVID itself. Most of our resources and time and effort probably just needs to be put on that. But now you got Putin doing this stuff. So now all of our time and effort is split. And then with that comes people that want to take advantage, and essentially they just want to bombard the United States from all angles. And so this is going to be where people that would be smart at the COVID are also smart at the Putin and also smart at the terrorism, you know? And that then it's like, what's the priority? And that then they're supposed to, you, you take on too much at once. It diminishes the quality output of everything. And I mean, this is really, this is like the types of stuff that I find people like analyzing.